Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Zwerling. I'm here with my colleague, Harpreet Kaur, and it's our privilege today to give today's presentation entitled Ensuring Compliance, the Legal and Practical Importance of Accurate Job Descriptions. Before getting started on the content, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you a little bit about our firm, a little bit about Harpreet and myself. Our firm, Garfunkel PC, it's a full-service healthcare law firm with about 90 attorneys. We're located in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., and Florida. We've been around now for over 44 years. And by full service, I'm referring to healthcare, litigation, managed care, corporate, compliance, finance, mental health law, biotech, and as evidenced by today's presentation, employment law as well. And we have since branched out even beyond the healthcare industry, but that's our reputation is built on the healthcare industry itself. Harpreet and I, we have collectively decades of experience as litigation and employment attorneys, handling matters from the local trial level through the U.S. Supreme Court. Harpreet and I both wear two hats. We both litigate cases. We know our way around the courtroom, but we also put out fires on a regular basis for our clients regarding employment matters, giving them counseling and guidance as issues erupt on, if not a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis. We've given presentations of this type on many occasions to large groups in person, hybrid versions, and today, virtual presentations to hundreds of people. Regardless of the format, regardless of the audience size, we always have the same approach, which is we encourage questions throughout the presentation. We're not live, so we can't just ask you to raise your hands, but you have that chat box feature. If you have questions along the way, feel free to use it, and we'll do our best to answer the questions as they roll in. If we don't, we'll do our best to answer them after the presentation. Some of you had already emailed questions to us beforehand. Rest assured, each one of those in terms of the subjects that you raised, we're going to give you those answers in the normal course of today's presentation. With regard to the presentation, this is CLE worthy, so I have to read you this little piece here. The content of this course is acceptable for both newly admitted and experienced attorneys. Please be sure you continue to stay connected on Zoom until the program concludes at approximately 1 o'clock. Participants will be eligible to receive 1 CLE credit in professional practice. For New York CLE attendance verification purposes, all course codes announced during the program must be recorded on the attorney affirmation and evaluation forms and emailed to Ivan Rodriguez. We're going to give you that code at the back end of the presentation. So what led to this presentation? What's the genesis? We had a lot of clients reaching out to us to update job descriptions at their respective entities. And when we looked at them, it led to the realization that many of them were out of date, were obsolete, simply inaccurate. And that was concerning to us as attorneys and on behalf of our clients, because a poorly drafted or obsolete job description can lead to a host of problems for an employer. For example, it can render the employer susceptible to litigation, for example, in the form of discrimination claims. And we're going to talk about all of these later on, Harpreet and I. It can give misimpressions of the expectations you may have of your employees in the handling of their job functions. It can hurt your recruiting efforts as an employer. Now, it would be cost prohibitive for us as lawyers to go through everybody's job descriptions. We represent institutions with thousands of employees. It would be costly and in some ways even absurd, because the employers, supervisors have the base knowledge that, would comprise or help one, complete such a job description. So we felt it made more sense for us, as we do on other occasions dealing with other subject matter as well, to provide guidance to clients in their efforts to write the job descriptions, hence today's program. Some quick points about the content today. This presentation is going to address the importance of accurate, up-to-date job descriptions and the legal and practical implications under various statutes, including the Fair Labor Standards Act, the American with Disabilities Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and so on. It's solely intended for private sector employees, and it's going to be based on federal law. So why do I say that? Keep in mind that state and local law may impose additional or different requirements, but the principles we're going to talk about today are relevant to employers in every state. And again, we're located in many jurisdictions, so hence the focus on federal law for today's presentation. That said, while federal law does not require written job descriptions, they're useful in several aspects of the employment relationship, including hiring, compensation, and managing employee performance. A poorly drafted job description can increase litigation risks by undermining the employer's position, for example, in wage and hour cases, discrimination cases, and other employment-related lawsuits. In this presentation, in terms of the agenda that we have for today, we're going to discuss the practical and legal implications of job descriptions, including the typical content of a job description, the purpose and utility of job descriptions, the importance of accurately describing and listing the essential functions of the job, and best practices for drafting and maintaining accurate and well-written job descriptions. Now we're going to go into a little more detail. Harpreet?
And so we're going to start with the basics on what is a job description and really understanding what goes into drafting one. And so a job description is a written document that summarizes the general nature of the work to be performed. It includes the specific responsibilities and duties, as well as the employee characteristics that are necessary to perform a job. It includes major duties, major responsibilities for the position, as well as job specifications, such as knowledge, skill sets necessary to complete the necessary work, as well as behaviors required to perform the job. And in some occasions may also include working conditions. Now, job description is often used interchangeably with position description. And while there is some overlap between these two terms, there are also some technical distinctions to be aware of. A job description is usually a generic summary of the key responsibilities, duties, and qualifications within the scope of a job classification. It typically includes a general description of the nature of the job and the level of work to be performed, as well as the skills and knowledge necessary for competent performance and other elements. A job description is often used to determine the appropriate salary grade for a position. A position description, on the other hand, is unique to an employee, as well as the particular role that the employee is hired to perform. It is tailored to the specific position, and it may differ between different organizations, as well as different departments within the same organization. The position description provides a more detailed summary of the specific duties and responsibilities and qualifications needed for that particular position, and is often used for budgeting as well as posting purposes, for example, posting online or on job boards. The position description is also often used as a guide for both employees and their supervisors to assess employee performance. The position description or job specification works hand in hand with a job description. And so, oops, I'm sorry. So what are the elements of a job description, right? Job descriptions can include a number of different things. To start, it often includes the job title, which is the formal name given to a specific role within the company. It may also include a job code applicable for the employer's internal operations, as well as the pay grade and the position to whom that specific role reports. A job description also often specifies whether a job is exempt or non-exempt from minimum wage and overtime requirements, whether it's a full-time or a part-time role, and whether it's temporary, seasonal, contract, or a permanent position. A job description should also, as we noted, describe the duties and responsibilities of that position, as well as the required qualifications for the role. Some employers may choose to separately list required qualifications as well as preferred qualifications, and some examples include education level, any professional or necessary licenses or certifications, prior work experience in a particular field or type of position, as well as skills such as proficiency in computer software or word processing systems, and traits such as attention to detail or the ability to manage deadlines. A job description may also include certain necessary physical requirements, such as whether it requires standing, sitting, or lifting for prolonged periods of time, as well as any physical work environments to which an employee may be exposed, including dust, fumes, or extreme heat or cold. Lastly, the job description can also include other information, such as the physical location where an employee will be working, whether it's in person, remote, or hybrid, as well as any travel requirements and the expected working hours. So what are the benefits of written job descriptions? First, they provide clarity to both the employee and supervisors on the job duties and responsibilities for the given role. By specifying the duties and responsibilities of each position, job descriptions clarify the nature, type, and classification of each role, the qualifications, knowledge, and skills necessary for that particular role, as well as an employer's expectations about the work to be performed. Accurate job descriptions also provide clarity for employers and employees because they communicate to all parties what a particular job requires. Job descriptions further aid in the recruiting and hiring process as they are useful in preparing accurate job postings. By specifying the required skills and qualifications, human resources personnel can accurately describe an available position and identify qualified candidates for the position.
Just if I can just interject and piggyback on what Harpreet said about how the importance of having clarity with regard to job duties and responsibilities. A lot of the phone calls that we get on a regular basis involve discipline issues, behavioral issues, performance issues, and it correlates to what we're talking about here today, because it'll be somebody not performing a role or a duty that they're supposed to perform. And, you know, one of the first things we'll ask is, what's the job description? How is that information imparted to the employee to put that employee on notice of what it is they're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis? Absent a job description or clarity in terms of that communication, it's akin to telling somebody to drive from New York to California without giving them a roadmap. So, that clarity, it's not even just helpful from a legal standpoint. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but just in terms of from a practical standpoint, it's critical in terms of the ground level interaction between the supervisor and the employee to have a job description that's fully and sufficiently informative.
And just going back to the recruiting and hiring process, as Andy mentioned, a complete and accurate job description not only provides, human resources personnel and other individuals within the company with the ability to identify qualified candidates, it also aids potential job seekers by permitting or enabling them to determine if they are qualified for a certain position to begin with. Yeah. Accurate job descriptions also aid in establishing compensation levels, as well as continuously reviewing and updating compensation levels. By identifying job titles and the position levels and describing the corresponding duties, responsibilities, and qualifications, employers are able to ensure that compensation levels are comparable to other positions within the industry, and that compensation levels remain consistent across the company as well as competitive. It is recommended that job descriptions be regularly reviewed internally within a company, as that not only ensures that job duties and responsibilities remain up to date and accurate, but it also ensures that the associate compensation is competitive as the nature of the position changes over time. Lastly, like Andy mentioned, and piggybacking off of him, an accurate written job description helps with the management of employee performance. It communicates to employees what their specific duties and responsibilities are, and it provides both employees and supervisors with a guideline to assessing employee performance, establishing future goals, developing future plans, and also structuring bonus, bonus and salary increases. If an employee is not meeting the requirements of the job, as Andy mentioned, the written job description provides that platform to measure the performance, and it can be used as a standard to also provide support to an employee, both in performance improvement, as well as serving a basis for decisions concerning discipline or termination for non-performance.
Okay, the legal implications of written job descriptions. The existence and content of your job descriptions, your written job descriptions, are often at issue in various legal contexts, as Harpreet and I, as litigators, have found, including disability accommodation cases, religious accommodation cases, FILSA cases, whether a position has properly been classified as exempt versus not exempt, managing an employee's return from medical leave. There's been a spike of those in the last 2 or 3 years. Discrimination claims are another context. Job descriptions, again, as litigators, are frequent, we have found anyway, are frequently key exhibits in employment litigation cases. And those exhibits can cut both ways. A good job description arms people like Harpreet and me accordingly. If it's not so well drafted, it's another story. As far as the ability to defend certain claims that are being raised where those job descriptions are relevant. So we're going to discuss some of the key or critical legal contexts about which you should be aware with regard to the sufficiency and accuracy of your job descriptions. One is the essential functions of the job and accommodation issues. Just by way of a very simple framework to help guide you, the American with Disabilities Act requires covered employers to provide qualified individuals with a disability with a reasonable accommodation unless doing so poses an undue hardship. To be a qualified individual under the ADA, an employee or applicant must possess the skills, experience, education, and other job-related requirements necessary for the position and relevant to today's topic, be able to perform, you've all heard this phrase, the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. So what are the essential functions of the job? Those are the fundamental job duties of the employment position the individual with a disability holds or desires. Marginal duties are not considered essential functions just by definition. A job description, a job function may be considered essential for a number of reasons. What are they? One, the reason the position exists is to perform that particular function. Two, the number of other employees available to perform the function or among whom the performance of the function can be shared. Another criteria or variable is the function may be highly specialized so that the individual is hired for their expertise or ability to perform the particular function. A qualified individual with a disability is one who can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. So bringing that simple framework or that brief framework to today's presentation, the ADA does not require employers to maintain a written job description, but having them, having a job description that identifies the essential functions for each position can be a significant benefit to you as an employer in at least a couple of ways. First, a written job description that includes the position's essential functions can help you as an employer identify whether or not an applicant can perform the essential functions of a position. For example, during an interview, you're not allowed to ask if the applicant has a disability that would prevent them from performing the job, but you can ask if the individual is the employer that he or she or they is unable to perform an essential job function because of a disability, then you're required to consider whether it's possible to reasonably accommodate that disability by engaging in an interactive process to determine whether or not a reasonable accommodation is possible. Can't do that unless you know what the essential functions of the job are, and that's where the written job description comes into play. Second, a written job description is useful in defending a claim of disability discrimination. what's going to happen? Someone's going to sue, claim disability discrimination, and you are going to be in a position of having to defend your decision either not to hire or to terminate an individual on the basis that they couldn't perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. And having that written job description, one that is prepared, importantly, before the litigation commences, goes a long way to defending a position that their inability to perform specific functions that correlate with the job description of or the litigation, I should say, of the essential functions goes a long way to defending that particular claim. Okay. Another legal context to consider is bona fide occupational qualification and discrimination issues. So what do I mean by that? Title VII of the Civil Rights Act generally prohibits employers from expressing a preference or requirement based on a protected class, such as the employee or applicant's race, religion, or sex. And this general prohibition extends to written job descriptions. Preferences based upon an employee's or applicant's religion, sex, or national origin, for example, however, can be used in extremely limited circumstances where you as the employer can demonstrate that the characteristic is a bona fide occupational qualification that's reasonably necessary to the normal operation of your business. An example of that would be a job description for a prison where they posted, and this was a litigated case, in the job description that they only wanted females to occupy the position as a prison guard. And the reason why is that the court in that particular case, defending this particular job description and its exception to the general rule, found that the employer in that case factually demonstrated the need for female guards in positions requiring close contact with female inmates. Again, you can see the correlation there. Another context, reasonable accommodation cases may also implicate job description issues. Title VII also requires employers to reasonably accommodate an applicant or an employee's sincerely held religious beliefs unless it would cause an undue hardship. These reasonable accommodation issues typically arise when there's a conflict between an employee or applicant's religious belief and their work requirements, including, we've had a bunch of these, and again, in the last year or two, certain issues are becoming more prominent. Dress code or appearance standards, grooming standards, shift or work schedule issues, limitations on when or where breaks may be taken. Having a written job description, again, that contains the essential functions and primary duties are helpful, not even just in a litigation context, but just in navigating how to problem solve on a day-to-day when these issues arise. Wage and hour contexts are critical with regard to job descriptions. FILSA, the Fair Labor Standard Act, generally requires employers to pay non-exempt employees minimum wage and overtime compensation. But there's a host of exemptions to those rules, especially when it comes to overtimes, where employees are properly classified as exempt. And how do you decide whether or not someone's going to be exempt? Well, depending upon the particular exemption, and there's executive exemption, and administrative exemption, and professional exemption, a focus with some of these exemptions is going to be on the employee's primary duty or duties, right? And that's, again, I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but that's where that correlation exists now between an exemption and your written job description. The primary job duties should be contained in the job description, and if that is properly documented in an accurate fashion, that'll help you in wage and hour cases. Again, whether it's a litigation or resolving a dispute pre-litigation as well. Okay. Lastly, medical leave issues. We have a lot of cases where someone's out on leave. It's time for them to come back. How do you know if somebody is fit for duty? Even in terms of figuring out what might be a reasonable accommodation, but job descriptions may also assist you as the employee where you're dealing with a fitness for duty certification in connection with someone coming off of leave, right? How is that physician or clinician going to understand what the responsibilities of your employee are when filling out that fitness for duty certification? by having a written job description to provide that clinician, it enables that clinician to assess whether or not the employee is ready to return to work. So again, we've only bulleted through a bunch of these issues, but you can see how critical they are in defending you or helping you should a litigation arise in any of these contexts. But again, I keep coming back to it, from a preventive standpoint, in navigating these issues pre-litigation. There's a couple of questions. Let's see. Will we have the slides? The answer is materials will be available. When you reach out to Ivan Rodriguez, the session is also being recorded. You should know, and CLE materials are going to be issued to those seeking CLE credit as well. Someone asked, where can I find a template to generate a job description for this individual? It's a helpful question just in terms of sharing some feedback with the audience. You know, templates are good, you know, as a starting point. But again, you want that job description to be tailored. You know, Harpreet went through the contrast between a job description and a position description. If your job description is just some bland vanilla pudding template that doesn't fit the specifics in your situation, you're setting yourself up for a problem pre-litigation or litigation. So use templates as a starting point. You know, we can assist in getting you started, you know, with a template for sure. You can also find plenty of, you know, information online as well. SHRM is a good resource as well. But again, can't stress enough, be careful when you're relying on templates.
And we will also be going over, you know, just some helpful tips, best practices on what to include, what, you know, in a job description when you're drafting one. We will be going over that shortly.
Okay, we'll continue.
Sure. So as I mentioned, next we'll cover some best practices for drafting a job description. And, you know, first and foremost, when looking at a job description or considering what to put in one, you should be focused on solely the job and what the requirements of the job and that position are. The job description should avoid the wish list of preferred skills or personality traits, and should focus on the work to be performed rather than the person or individual who will be performing that job. The job description should use, where appropriate, active words and phrases to describe the duties and responsibilities. Examples include evaluate or analyze or perform instead of words like simply review, assist, you know. And then the job description should use clear, concise, and easily understood language, and also allow for flexibility. It is common for the nature of any position to change over time, and this should be reflected in the job description and communicated to candidates accordingly. Specifically, potential candidates as well as employees should be informed that the job description may be subject to change without notice based upon the needs of the company or the employer.
And just to go back to what we said earlier, you should be updating your job descriptions. And no, you don't have to, you know, there's no requirement that you give people notice of that change. But as a practical matter, your supervisor should be letting the employees know what their, you know, new job duties may be. It's not a legal requirement, but it can avoid a host of problems down the road.
So when drafting a job descriptions, as you know, going off of what we were just talking about, employers should consider any potential future developments. You know, should keep in mind the changing needs of the company or the specific department within which the job functions to help identify any gaps in the workforce. And one way to do this is by speaking with department managers or department heads and supervisors, as well as other major decision makers, to determine what future hiring needs there might be. Job descriptions should also list job tasks by priority, organize the list of essential tasks and qualifications from most important to least important. And lastly, the job description should be specific and precise. So without exaggerating the needs of a particular role, an employer should avoid language that is vague or that diminishes the importance of the role, the duties, and the responsibilities. For example, rather than describing a role as assisting with something or supporting someone or acting pursuant to a company's standard operating procedures, which is unlikely to satisfy the requirements of the FILSA's executive or administrative exemptions, job descriptions should, going back to what we were saying, use more active words, manage, the budget, or evaluate reports, or, generate reports, and so on. Job descriptions should also avoid any reference to protected class or prejudicial language. Examples of the type of language to avoid include, language along the lines of heavy lifting required, only male candidates will be considered for heavy lifting positions, or bilingual ability required, only blank nationality will be considered. Language like this should never appear in a job description. The job description should also set reasonable expectations. If an employer sets the bar too high or too low, it can affect the candidate pool. Job descriptions should be consistent. For example, it is helpful to define terms like may, occasionally, and periodically do XYZ to clearly outline what the expectations and requirements are. And kind of just going back to what we've been talking about all along, this really helps to set performance expectations and really provides both employees and supervisors with the tool needed to evaluate ongoing performance and identify any needs where they may exist. It is also important when drafting job descriptions to consult with and obtain input from others within the organization. For example, employers should solicit information from other employees that may be in the same or similar roles, managers and supervisors that oversee the position, and so on. Management and the position supervisor should also review the job description periodically. As the individual that's on the ground with the employees, the position supervisor can really help ensure that the job description remains accurate and true to what the position requires. Management, upper level management, should also review the job description to help ensure consistency across positions throughout various departments and the company in general. Lastly, it is recommended that employers, well, not lastly, but it is also recommended that employers observe employees as they perform their jobs at different times of the day and also, days of the week, and interview employees as well as their supervisors. This is a good way to obtain firsthand knowledge and information on what the true requirements and needs of a particular role might be. Lastly, and as I think we've mentioned a few times already, employers should periodically review job descriptions, written job descriptions, at least annually, to ensure that they continue to accurately reflect the requirements of the position. And they should also be updated as needed. And while federal law does not require employers to maintain written job descriptions, their state or local laws may require employers to retain job descriptions for a specified period of time. For example, the Equal Pay Act requires retention of job descriptions for at least 2 years. So it is helpful to keep in mind what the record retention requirements might be within the jurisdiction in which the employer operates.
All right. What to include in the job description? Someone raised the question, I am dealing with an HR current situation with a new employee who is a lead director who is disclosed as ADHD and identifies as neurodivergent. He cannot complete internal and external meetings owing to stress-inducing. That's in quotes, stress-inducing. Is that identity protected under ADA? Thanks. As you may be aware, all of you, we can't give out legal advice. We don't have any attorney-client relationship. But in answering that question, I'm going to answer it in a generic way, create a generic framework. Anytime you as an employer are told or have reason to believe or perceive that an employee has a disability, it's going to engage or implicate what's known as the interactive dialogue or the interactive process, where you're going to have to sit down, not literally, but meet with that employee to discuss whether or not, this goes back to what we said earlier, that employee can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation, whether it's ADHD, whatever the disability may be. And when you're having that discussion and that exchange, that's where the job description that Harpreet and I are talking about comes into play. So to answer your question, you know, you're going to have a job description for that particular position, and you're going to correlate that job description with the limitations of that employee to see if there's a fit, that fit known as a reasonable accommodation that enables that employee to perform the essential functions of the job with or without with or without a reasonable accommodation. Okay, so what to include in the job description? The date. It's really helpful. This is true with policies as well. Include the date on the job description. Why? It's just helpful to you as a reminder when it's time to review it, make sure it's up to date, not obsolete, not inaccurate in any way. Include the job title. Just a brief description, 1 to 3 words, you know, OR tech. Use titles that are common in your industry and be consistent within the organizational structure, because you really don't want to have people with different titles performing the same functions. It can lead to confusion of various types, sometimes with you know, certain exposure. You want a title that communicates the level, the responsibility, and the type of work. But again, it's nothing elaborate. You want to have also in there a position summary or objective that, you know, as it indicated on the screen there, it's going to provide a high-level overview of the role, the level and scope of responsibility, and the key functions of the job. And in addition, it will convey key qualifications, education, experience, skills, etc., required to be successful in the job. This is a very important part of the job description, as is usually the first part of the job description. That job, whether it's someone working for you or a prospective employee or applicant, they're going to read, what's the job, you know, description summary going to be? That'll give them insight into whether or not they should even bother looking any further. It's going to give them the first taste of what they can expect to do in the job, and that can impact your recruitment efforts, because if they look at that and have that visceral reaction of I can't do that versus I can do that, you know, that can steer them in the right direction, which is good for you as the employer. Moving on to the next slide, and you're going to want to have in your job description classification. Again, we went over this just before, whether someone is exempt or non-exempt. A review of current job descriptions is critical in the effort to ensure that your employees are properly classified. You want to avoid a situation, for example, where some employees are wrongfully classified as non-exempt and others as exempt, even though they're performing the same roles. We've had that on too many occasions, where people performing the same role are differently classified, or you have a situation where someone's wrongfully classified as exempt and they haven't been getting their overtime. And anyone who has dealt with wage and hour litigations, as Harpreet and I have, they are costly when you make mistakes. The ability to defend a provable wage and hour claim is pretty tough. So you're going to spend a whole lot of money at the back end if you don't take care of that. So again, the classification is going to be in there, include what exemption applies, if any, whether it's the white collar, the executive, the administrative, and in figuring that out, you're going to conduct the requisite analysis required under FILSA, you know, in terms of the salary basis, the duties test, and so on. And that duties test is going to implicate your primary duties, which implicates your job description. So you're going to want to be consistent and have that correlate across the board. You're also going to have in your job description the salary grade, the level, the family, the range. You want compensation levels, the groups into which jobs of the same or similar worth are placed in, and the range of pay rates, including minimum and maximum pay bands, position type. Is it full-time? Is it part-time? Is it temporary? Is it per diem? Typical work hours and shifts, the days of the week, whether overtime is expected. Again, what you're doing by providing all this information is you're making sure that your needs are going to be filled, and you're also informing an applicant or the current employee of what's expected of that person, so they can make their own individual assessment whether or not they want to bother applying or staying. Okay, who they report to, the title of the position the job reports to. The next slide will have job responsibilities. This is the cornerstone of the job description. This is what provides a clear understanding of what the job is. It ensures that the supervisor and the employee are on the same page and have a common understanding of the expectation, role, and scope of the position. It provides the basis for performance appraisals, which also ties into compensation issues when those kick in. As Harpreet mentioned earlier, the supervisor of the position should be involved in writing this particular job description, because that individual, along with management, is going to have, the most base knowledge as to what's truly involved to get the job done. You're going to list the essential functions, including how an individual is to perform them, whether the task is major or minor, the frequency at which tasks to be performed. Note that the essential functions of a job are not synonymous by definition with all of the functions of the job. So you're going to have essential functions versus marginal ones. That's going to come into play not simply in terms of how you set the expectation level for the employee, but if there's a disability claim, for example, you're going to want to know what's marginal and what's essential in responding to that. Okay. We can go to the next slide. Okay.
So, among other things, as we've been discussing, the job description typically includes what the requirements and qualifications for a certain position will be. And these requirements should really be based on what should be limited to job-related requirements and be consistent with business necessity. Among other things, a job description will typically include the minimum level and type of education that is needed to successfully perform the job, as well as any acceptable substitutions. It is helpful to keep in mind that education doesn't necessarily mean a traditional academic setting, and that there could be other forms of relevant job education, such as training received from a part-time job or an internship that could also be considered. Experience is also included in job descriptions, typically the minimum level and type of experience needed to be successful at the job, as well as any acceptable substitutions. Again, it's useful to keep in mind that experience qualifications should not be defined so strictly that potential candidates who could perform the job are disqualified or turned away from applying for the position. Job descriptions should also include any necessary licenses or certifications, as well as list any preferred or required competencies, knowledge, and skill sets, such as word processing capabilities or Excel capabilities. Lastly, job descriptions may also list any other required or necessary skills to perform the job. For example, experience working with certain equipment, or where necessary, fluency in certain languages. Job descriptions may also include supervisory responsibilities. So, who will be overseeing the individual, and who the individual will report to, as well as what the level of supervision will be required for the position. So there are varying levels of supervision. There could be close supervision, where the individual is assigned to duties according to specific procedures and receives detailed instructions from their supervisor, and their work is checked more frequently. There could be general supervision, where the individual receives little instruction on a day-to-day basis and receives general instructions on new assignments. And then there could be general direction where the individual has the capabilities to exercise wide latitude in determining how to perform and complete their assignments. By outlining the level of supervision that a position will be subject to. Again, it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about. It helps to manage expectations and really inform both the individual as well as the employer on what the requirements for that specific function will be. The job description may also lay out what the work environment will be in which the individual will be working. It may include temperature, for example, extreme heat or extreme cold, whether the individual will be exposed to certain noise levels. Say, for example, it's a manufacturing job and they'll be working in an environment where they will frequently be exposed to loud noises coming from machinery. That's something that could be included in the job description. It's also helpful to note whether the position requires working inside or outside, and whether, for example, frequent travel will be required, and so on. That will affect the person's working conditions while performing the job. It's also helpful to describe whether the role will require irregular or unusual work or work hours, and any other situations or environments that the average individual may find unpleasant or could be hazardous. Lastly, and I think we went over this earlier, it's also helpful to include the location of the position. So for example, where the individual will be physically located, whether that's in a specific city, New York City, or Los Angeles, whether the individual has the ability to work remotely, whether it'll be hybrid, 2 days in, 3 days out, or whether it'll be an in-person role, and so on.
Okay. Before touching on physical demands, Harpreet had just left off about whether travel is required, whether the position is remote or hybrid or in person. Since COVID, we've had a whole lot of matters involving that specific issue where someone is hired and there's a certain requirement, in-person requirement, I should say, whether it's 5 days a week, whether it's 2 days a week. Well, all of a sudden the person is working remotely or asks for an accommodation for this ability to work remotely. And then the tension line develops between whether or not their presence in person on site is required. And having a job description, it usually involved the matters I'm thinking about, supervisors, and whether they needed to be on site, whether their physical presence was really essential for them to perform their jobs. And when we've handled those situations, we've gone granular with regard to, okay, does the person really need to be on site to perform their job? Is their location where they're performing their role critical to getting the job done? And it's gone both ways depending upon the situation, because each job function is going to differ. Okay, but again, indicating that in the job description is helpful, because a couple of the matters we handled, it was very helpful to be able to say that the employee was told beforehand, before they were hired, this was a requirement of the job. And you knew that coming in, and your situation has not changed. You just want your job requirement to change. And so again, having that job description specify what's needed in terms of the situs of the work is very helpful. So physical demands, describe the type, the intensity, how much frequency, in terms of frequency and duration of the physical demands of mental capabilities required by the job. For example, is bending required, lifting, standing, and so on. For how long, is standing required? Is it 5 minutes, or is it, you're working in the operating room and you're dealing with a surgery that may last hours, whatever your clinical role may be. The physical demands must be tied to the essential functions of the job. And to that extent, be as precise as possible in connecting the physical requirement to the job itself. For example, if the position, and again, we deal a lot with healthcare, is for an operating room tech, put in there, must be able to stand for X amount of hours during the surgeries. So if someone gets hired and you've already specified what that need is, I'm making up a number, 8 hours, and all of a sudden they show up first day and go, "Oh, I can't stand for more than an hour." Well, you were told up front what the requirements were. Again, it's a helpful starting point for you as the employer in resolving that particular situation. Um, Last slide up. Okay, other duties, I have a disclaimer in there. We said this before that the duties may change. Additional duties may be assigned at any time with or without notice. Again, you want to have that flexibility because in the normal course, job descriptions are going to evolve over time. So you want to have that latitude in dealing with an employee and telling that person how their particular role has changed. Okay. Again, you're not required to give them notice, send them an email or something like that. As a practical matter, a supervisor is going to explain the change in duties, but it's not a legal requirement, and you want to have the disclaimer in there because we've had plenty of situations where an employee goes, "Wait, I wasn't hired to do that. I was only hired to do that." Okay, and it says, "Well, your job description may have contained that and that, but even if it doesn't, we're allowed to change your job description, and you have the freedom to go look elsewhere if you don't want to perform these other functions that we deem within your job description as it's evolved." So that disclaimer is helpful. Signature lines, employees in the position and the supervisor should sign, acknowledging the accuracy. Again, it helps you should some dispute arise. If the person says, "I didn't know I had to perform a certain, role or function," you're able to say, "Wait, but you had the job description, you presumably read it because you signed it." Again, it's not necessary. It's just another helpful tool. And part of what Harpreet and I, are attempting to do here through today's presentation is to give you information and guidance as preventive measures. Yeah, we can litigate, but we do a fine job of that. But, we see our primary role as keeping you out of trouble. And helping you navigate when issues are small before they evolve into something more serious. With that said, again, it was our pleasure to give today's presentation. For those who are obtaining CLE credit, you're going to be receiving a separate email with CLE forms for you to complete. As far as the CLE code is concerned, and I'm going to repeat it because I've been where you're sitting and you don't always hear it said one time. It's going to be 07, C as in cat, S as in Sam, 24. Again, 07, C as in cat, S as in Sam, 24. Again, thanks everybody for your attention and for staying on for the duration. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. The right X.